Larry Wilmore, you're the host of the Nightly Show, which premiered in January on Comedy Central in the former Colbert Report time slot. At what point after Stephen Colbert announced that he was going to be leaving was the decision made for you to take over that time slot?
I think it was about maybe a month. I think a few weeks had passed of speculation and everything, and it was real interesting because I wasn't on anybody's radar screen. In fact, I remember there was an article about who might take over Colbert, and they were talking about people from the Daily Show, and I wasn't even in that article. I remember it was hilarious. So no one was thinking about me.
Was that always something that you had been interested in pursuing, your own talk show, or did the whole thing come as kind of a surprise?
Yeah, I had done a special for Showtime called Larry Wilmore's Race, Religion, and Sex in Utah, and it was an election special before the 2012 election, and then I did one in Florida, and I had so much fun doing it, and I kind of led a panel discussion and that kind of stuff, and it was real silly. So it kind of provided the template for this. And it's something that I had wanted to do, but I'll be honest with you, I had thought the window was closed for doing that. I was producing the show Blackish over at ABC when all of this happened. I was doing the pilot for it because I'm also a showrunner and writer and that kind of stuff. I kind of perform, I moonlight as a performer kind of. So it was a big surprise to me, I'll be honest with you.
So what kind of made you decide to take that panel format to the Nightly Show? Was that always your intention when the opportunity came that you would bring that panel over?
Well, that part was a coincidence because that was what I did on my show, but to do it on this show was Jon Stewart's idea, actually. He wanted to have a show. Jon Stewart was very passionate about putting on a show where voices that we didn't get a chance to hear all the time could finally be heard. Minority voices, underdog voices, people who don't get to see all the time, underrepresented, all that, whatever that means out there. He said it would be good to have a show where people have a forum for that. It doesn't have to be filtered through somebody like him. So that all came from Jon, and he saw me as the ringleader of that circus.
Yeah, and what has it been like, adjusting to that role, not only as the host of the show, but as a moderator, which is, sort of a unique duty for a late-night talk show host?
I know, it really is. It's the hardest part to really get used to. It's tough because you're doing two shows in one. You're doing the first part of it, which is just a pure comic segment, where you're basically, you work on a script and you're doing it and you're performing it. And that's fun, that I'm used to, and that's fun. But the moderating part is very difficult because you have different topics every night. You have to be informed on it. The conversation has to move. It's this listening thing and talk. I mean, there's so much going on. It makes your brain explode, And it's very intimidating at first. And I'll be honest with you. Every day I get more and more comfortable with it. I'm still not at the point where I feel like I've got this down. It's very intimidating.
And the format is sometimes fluid, as I've seen on the show. Usually open with that, sort of monologue at the desk, and then, but other times you go straight for the panel discussion at the very beginning. How are the decisions made to, from show to show, whether to mix up that structure, whether to do the Keep It 100 segment that night, that sort of thing?
Well, everything that we do in the show, we try to drive it by content first. So it's like, what are we talking about first, and then let's figure out how to do that in the show, rather than the other way around. So we don't from the beginning say we're going to do Keep It 100 tonight, or we're not. We say, well, what are we talking about, and we let that dictate how we're going to cover it. But we actually have some changes coming up in the show. I think we're going to reduce our panel from 4 to 3 because it's just beginning. It's too hard to really service 4 people. And so we're going on a break next week, and when we come back, it's going to be a little tighter. We're going to see how that works.
Yeah, and the people you do select for those panels, they're different people, in every panel depending on what the topic is and what their area of expertise is. What is the kind of thought and preparation that goes into, selecting panelists and getting people onto the show? It's
a great question. It's one of the toughest things to do, and we drive our bookers crazy because we don't know till the day before what our topic is most of the time. And that's when you want to do most of your booking based on the topic, right? But sometimes there may be a guest who we know is going to be in town, somebody who's cool, who we want to talk to, and we'll book them first. And sometimes they don't necessarily line up with the topic, and sometimes they do. It's a chance you take, But the philosophy behind it is I like to think of I like to think of that panel as me, like at my black barbershop, and you're just busting everybody's balls, you know, because that's the feel there, where it's a safe environment. There's no hate being thrown around. It's all fun, but we're going to call you on your shit if you say some fucked up stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what the barbershop feels. So that's what I'm trying to create in there, where it's fun, but we're going to call you and stuff, you know? So I want to bring people in there who are informed on subjects, but they're fun too. They like to mix it up and like to, you know, hey, and I'm the same way. Hey, if you're gonna bust my balls, I'm gonna go for it, you know.
The show covers you know, a lot of news and current events, and that sort of dictates a lot of the topics sometimes. But you also go into some broader subjects, you know, like fat shaming, black women in America, things like that. You know, how are topics chosen?
Well, it's a combination of what is going on right now. Is there something coming out of the news that we find interesting? And also, what is our point of view? And when we were first coming up with the show, I said, at its core, this show has to take on the role of sticking up for the underdog. That's where we start all the time. And who's the underdog in this story? You know. And Jon Stewart, when he thought of the show, he first called it the Minority Report. And Jon said, look, Larry, he said, Larry, I'll be honest with you. He says, I think everything comes down to race, class, and gender, you know. And so that plays a part in a lot of ways we cover things too, you know. And it's funny how big an issue class is in almost everything you talk about. I'm fascinated by that. And so we kind of look at all those angles. Underdog, what's the cultural conversation here? What's happening in the culture that is really interesting, that's going to provoke a really good conversation? And it's funny because I'm finding out some things are probably working better than others. Like with politics, I find isn't as interesting sometimes on our show because people already have their points of view that you're familiar with. So there's not as much surprise when we're mixing it up with politics. But culture, like if you're talking about gender roles and men and women or workplace things, that's real. I'm finding that's very interesting because there's so many varied opinions that cross over ideological lines, you know.
You mentioned, you know, diversity, you know, and Jon Stewart's effort to sort of bring diversity. I think he's done that on the Daily Show in recent years too. And you know,
I think I was one of the pioneers on that, senior black correspondent.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed about that is not just you know, that it's good to have, you know, diversity for its own sake, but that it actually makes, you know, comedy and discussion better because it opens things up to a much, you know, broader points of view and opinions and viewpoints. You know, have you had that, you know, experience? Has, you know, you had that feeling when you've been doing this show?
Absolutely. And one of the things I want to strive for too is not just diversity of experience, but also diversity of ideas. You know, it's important for me to have people from other sides, you know, right and left, you know, male and female, you know, American, non-American, you know, whatever it is, you know, to open up what diversity means, you know. You know, black and white is just one part of what that means. There's so much to diversity, and it's fun too. Oh, and old and young is a great thing about diversity too. I love hearing from older and younger people, you know, and seeing the conflicts of just the way our thinking process goes on issues, you know, and where they land the same and where they land differently. So I love everything that term implies. I love having that on a show like this.
Are there any topics, you know, that you're especially eager to cover that maybe you haven't done yet for some reason?
It's funny. It's kind of hard to think of it because we're kind of when you're in the eye of the hurricane, you know, you're just kind of doing it. But I guess it's fair for me to say I'm eager to just keep tackling topics as they come up, you know. Definitely this 2016 election, even though I just trashed, you know, I'm talking about politics, I think it's going to be very fascinating because there's so many big issues coming up, and the election is going to be the umbrella to talk about a lot of these issues. So that's going to be exciting to talk about that, you know.
You've touched on a lot of, you know, sort of third-rail topics on the show already. You know, for instance, in just your second episode, you already went into the, you know, the Bill Cosby story. You know, but are there any hot-button subjects that you might shy away from, or really there are just no limits?
I don't think there are any limits. I mean, you certainly don't want to talk about things that are just too sad. You know, we are a comedy show, you know. You know, so you have to be careful about that, but it depends on how important it is also. Sometimes there's a way to bring something up without going into, the real tragedy of it. So there's a balance in that. But in terms of something just being a hot topic, that's exactly what we want on our show. Something that we are afraid to discuss or talk about it is exactly the type of thing I feel we should be talking about. We had a lot of fun with the whole Starbucks thing, the whole race together thing the other night, where I said, instead of coffee having us come together to talk about race, let's have race have us come to talk about coffee, and just have fun with that type of thing, and the absurdity of it all. I love when things get taken to the absurd level too.
Have you had especially up to this point, an especially favorite topic that you've done or discussion that you've done that you just had the right panelists, the right subject, and everything clicked?
Last night was a fun one. We were talking. God, now my brain already goes down. What? And I'm like, what were we talking about last night? But, we were talking about slut shaming.
Oh, yeah.
And that we could have talked about that all night. There were so many issues with that, and it's one of those interesting. I wouldn't call it a new issue, but the term that has been coined is kind of a newish term. So anytime we start coining new things, they lead to these interesting discussions. But yeah, there have been several where I feel like, man, this discussion could have gone on forever. You brought up fat shaming. I still don't know what to think of that. I still don't even know what that means, to be honest with you. Like for me, I'm ashamed of my personal fat. I'm not trying to shame anybody for theirs, but should I not have that fit? I'm confused. I don't even know what to think about that.
You're dealing with these big topics in this limited time. As you mentioned, you could talk about some of these things for hours and hours on end, and you've got a half-hour show.
Yes.
Is there a lot of the discussion that ends up sort of on the cutting room floor? It doesn't make it to the air just because there's so much?
Yes, there's a little bit of that. We had a discussion the other night. Now I can't remember the topic. Like I said, my brain gets fried. But we actually put some of that on the web for the first time. And we may do more of that, where it's such a hot topic, we'll just let the discussion keep going. We'll throw it on the web. You can watch the whole discussion there, and you'll see the best of it maybe on the show. So I think we'll do more of that.
One of your probably more controversial shows up to this point was, the vaccinations panel, and you had an anti-vaxxer there, which was kind of a controversial choice. How did you feel that went in hindsight? And was there anything you would have done differently, or do you feel like you're happy with how that was?
No, let me be clear about something. There's always something I would have done differently. Almost immediately after we wrap, I go, fuck, why didn't I say this? Or, wish I could have covered that. In fact, we brought that subject back up. We called it we had an episode called Part 2, where we bring subjects back up, and we say, what did we not cover in it? And we still couldn't cover everything we wanted to. But the anti-vax thing, there's so much nuance in that, and so much misinformation and disinformation floating around in there and people are so they're so emotional about that issue too. But and for me personally, I have a son who has Asperger's, is on the autism spectrum, and he's been vaccinated and everything too, and I know there was nothing about the vaccinations that caused that, and I would not want to risk him dying from something for him not to be who he is, So I have very strong opinions about that myself personally, But I think you're right. I think that, interesting enough, something about preventing disease would be our most divisive topic. I mean, go figure. Doesn't even make sense. Who would have thought?
Yeah,
protecting yourself against measles, Larry. Careful, that is a very divisive subject. Are you fucking kidding me? We're talking about the measles. Who wants the measles?
It's sort of weird, you get to a certain point in society where you've solved these big problems, and sort of like, no, let's bring this problem back. We need more to talk about.
Measles wasn't that bad. Come on, tuberculosis really wasn't that bad. You guys.
Polio is in these days.
Yeah, TB is such a cute name too. I mean, who doesn't like TB, for Christ's sakes?
No, a lot of people probably first came to know you, as a contributor on The Daily Show, but by then, you already an Emmy-winning writer for the Bernie Mac Show, and you've been nominated also for In Living Color and the PJs. What do you remember about that year that you won for the Bernie Mac Show? Was that a big surprise? What was that like?
Completely. Anytime you get that kind of acclaim from your peers, always a big surprise. I don't care what anybody says. there's a lot of luck involved, and you know there's always a small window for you to get those things, so you're very happy about it. It meant a lot to me at the time because I was having so many fights with the network, and I eventually got fired like 8 months later, you know, after winning all these awards, and I learned so much about how hard it is just to do anything in Hollywood. So it was that all was a very humbling experience. You know, it was the highest highs and the lowest lows, you know. But it's funny because during that time I really learned to just bet on myself. It's like, Larry, just if you think you're funny or whatever, just keep betting on yourself. And it gave me the confidence to go back to what I did from the beginning, was performing, and to even make the. If I had never gotten fired from the Bernie Mac show, probably never would have been on the Daily Show. You know, I never would have felt that I needed to keep reinventing myself at that time. So it's interesting how high highs and low lows can get you to just keep it real, to just keep it 100. You know.
Yeah, so you would say that not just the the Emmy, but the experience on the Bernie Mac show really had a big transformative effect on your career.
Absolutely, completely. And it's funny because as a writer, I felt like, man, I was so proud of myself. I felt like I really evolved to a point where I really pushed myself and did something that I hadn't particularly seen with the Bernie Mac show. I was doing a completely different type of writing than I had done. You know, when you're just writing the regular sitcom set up joke type of thing, you know. So I was so proud of it, and then to be punished for it, you know, was like, ah! You know? So yes, I learned so many things during that experience, and then at that point where I felt like I had made that evolution, and then to go back to performing was a big risk. It's like, why not keep going down that road? But, you know, it was a big transition in my life, you know.
And you wear a lot of hats, you're a performer, writer, you're a producer, do you consider yourself, do you think of yourself as sort of one in particular, like you're a writer first, you're a performer first?
If I'm to be honest with myself, I probably am a writer first, because I like that process a lot. I like producing a lot. Producing is probably my favorite thing. In fact, I helped launch Blackish this past year for ABC. That's what I was doing when I called for this, because I think I like putting the pieces together a lot. You know, performing is fun, and it's the funnest thing that you can do because you get the immediate feedback from the audience and all that stuff. But it has its limitations as well. But don't let anybody fool you. There's nothing like performing. It really is a lot of fun. You know, but it is very difficult to do that all the time. Writing is the hardest thing that you can do. Producing is probably the most fulfilling overall. So there you go. That's all three of them, man. Even though I enjoy writing, I hate it at the same time, and every writer will tell you that.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? You just say, like, people say, Larry, why do you write? And I say, because I have a deadline. Because it has to be turned in. Otherwise, I'd never get anything done. If it was up to me, I'd never get anything done.
You mentioned there's sort of a limited window for the kind of recognition you got for the Bernie Mac show, but now you're in a position where that window could be opening again because so much change in late night TV, and that could mean big changes for variety series at the Emmys, and now there are 2 variety categories, one for talk shows like yours and one for sketch comedies.
Yes.
So your thoughts about coming in there and getting back into the Emmys?
I didn't even know that was the case. I hadn't been keeping up with it. That's great, I think, with the Emmys, the categories have always been kind of odd. I was on the board of directors for the Writers Guild for a while, too, so I dealt with some of these issues. And to me, I think that would be exciting, by the way, to be in that conversation. As I said, that's bonus land as far as I'm concerned, And I think there's a lot of great shows happening right. John Oliver's show, I think, is fantastic. Fallon has kind of reinvented, what that space is. Who knows what Colbert is going to do when he comes out, Somebody new is going to be at the Daily Show. There's so much fun stuff going on, in that format right now. But also, I think the other category that's controversial right now is the comedy category, because you have these, I think they should come up with a dramedy category for shows like Orange is the New Black or Nurse Jackie or some of these shows. They're not really comedies and they're not dramas. I think they need a new category for that, because shows like Big Bang Theory clearly aren't the same as, Nurse Jackie. Those aren't the same thing. Sorry, Nurse Jackie.
No, it's absolutely true. It's one of those difficult things that used to be television, used to be simple, and you had like these legal dramas or these cop dramas, and then you had these multi-camera, laugh track sitcoms, that kind of thing. And now that space is just kind of becoming much more muddled in a good way because there's so much, diversity, but diversity of content and the way of telling stories. So
doesn't fit neatly in those categories anymore. So, and I think they have done a good job of continuing to define those categories. And look, at the end of the day, it's all self-serving congratulations too. So a lot of people don't even give a shit about it. So what are you going to do? And rightly so, I might add.
But that's I think it's sort of a good thing that a lot of awards just stay the same forever, like the Oscars change the name of makeup to makeup and hairstyling, and that's like a headline. But the Emmys are constantly trying to evolve and change how they recognize TV. So it's probably the best.
I think people are whinier and grumpier in television. That's probably why.
Well, I want to, congratulate you again on the show and wish you the best of luck later this season at the Emmys and with any future topics that come up on the show. Thank you very much for talking with me today.
I appreciate it. Thank you. It was my pleasure.